But today, before we kind of dismiss the church and outside spiritual authority, I want to tell you a story. Because it turns out that these things we hear in modern day America, it's not the first time that they've ever appeared in the history of God's people. In fact, in the Old Testament, there's a chunk of time, I think about 300 years, when people did what they felt was right. When there was no spiritual authority above them, no permissions required, no explanations needed, they prayed and they tried to stay connected with God, and they did what they felt was right in their own eyes. And today I want to tell you what happened in that story and where it led to. I'll give you a hint. It wasn't pretty. It started out bad, and then it got worse. And the story I'm going to tell you today is downright ugly. It happened in the book of Judges when there were no kings and when everyone did what they felt was best. Now, let me prove it to you. In the book of Judges, chapter 19, it says, "In those days, Israel had no king." It's a huge theme if you would read the book of Judges from the start to the finish. It comes up in chapter 17, chapter 18, chapter 19, and then the very last verse of the entire book. In those days, there was no king. There's no institution to report to. There was no guy who had spiritual oversight over your heart. It's kind of ironic, but in the days of the judges, there was no one to judge you. No one to be judgmental. No one to decide if what you believed and how you behaved was right or wrong. Because Judges happens in this 300-year span between Moses and Joshua and the first kings of Israel. And Moses and Joshua would hear a word from God. They would call the people to repentance. They would correct what they saw wasn't quite right. And when the first kings of Israel, like King Saul and King David and King Solomon came, they spoke words from God with authority. But in between those two times, in the book of Judges, there was no king. And so you can see the second passage, everyone did as they saw fit. God's people didn't turn away from God necessarily. They didn't become atheists. They were just independent and very much into God. And if you've read the book, you know that things didn't turn out as well as you might hope. In fact, tonight I want to tell you the story of the very last thing that happens in the book of Judges, when things go from bad to disgusting to almost unreadable. It's a story that's not for the faint of heart, but it reminds us this trajectory of when everyone does what they feel is right, where it can lead.